Good morning, Madam Chair.
Morning. Notes together and we'll get started shortly.
Good morning, Lydia. Good morning, Kenzie.
Morning, Ed.
Morning, everybody.
Anissa.
Good morning. Good morning, Anissa.
I'm sorry to Google it. Yep. Right. Yes.
I'm gonna send a reminder text and we'll just start at like 10:03, 10:05 in 2 minutes, just to make sure we're all on. 1 second.
Right. So the Vital app, you think you can download that maybe? Okay. Mhm.
Did you take a picture of his head?
Oh no, Ed, you gotta tell me when to look up.
The whole camera was your cell phone. You gotta learn how to do a screenshot on your computer. You're on mute, Ed. You're on mute.
It's going to go on People magazine.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think it's more appropriate to go on Lifetime Radio because tweaking it. Come on, get hit, give hit. All right, guys. Let me just check. I'll wait on a text of order of arrival, but I'll do the intro stuff and make sure we're all set. So, all right. Good morning, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Housing and Community Development Committee. It is Tuesday, November 17th, 2020, and we are here today for a virtual working session on docket 0998, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $9,781,393 in the form of a grant from CDBG FYI, fiscal year 20 CARES supplemental awarded by the U.S. Department of HUD to be administered by the Department of D&D for Boston. The grant would fund programs to help alleviate housing and economic crisis conditions caused by COVID-19. Docket 0587, which is an order for hearing regarding the creation of temporary rental assistance filed by myself to support residents impacted by COVID-19, and docket 0218 filed by Councilor Flynn, an order for a hearing to discuss ways to support tenants facing eviction and displacement. We figured this is a comprehensive conversation and they would naturally flow into each other. So we've had a lot of update conversations, and I know now that the eviction moratorium is up, this seems very timely. In accordance with the Governor Baker's March 12th executive order, we've modified open meeting laws, allowing us to meet virtually. This balances public safety, but also allows for us to do our jobs as city councilors. The public may watch this hearing via working session, via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.housing@boston.gov or Juan Lopez at boston.gov. That's JUAN.LOPEZ@boston.gov. And will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. Again, as stated, these matters are sponsored by first the mayor of 0998, myself, 0587, and Councilor Flynn of 0281, and referred to the Committee on Housing and Community Development on September 23rd, 2020, April 1st, 2020, and January 15th, 2020. Attending From the administration, we have Tim Davis, Deputy Director of Policy and Research at DND, Taylor Kane, Director of Housing Innovation Lab of DND, Dominique Williams, yes, a Deputy Director of Office of Housing Stability, and Rick Wilson from the Deputy Director of Finance at DND. I'm joined by my colleagues, and I hope I have I don't have the order quite yet in text, but I do know that Councillor Flynn, Councillor Asabi George, Councillor Bach are here. Am I missing anybody else? I don't think so. Okay, so we're hosting this conversation to really get an update and ask any questions we have about what is going on with the rent and housing crisis now in the city of Boston. I'm going to go ahead and allow for my colleagues to speak. Check my text messages. I don't see. So I think if I had to gather, it would probably be Bach, Flynn, and then Asabi George. Am I correct in that order? Or is it Flynn, Bach?
Ed definitely beat me here.
He always beats everybody. Oh yeah. Okay then. So it's Flynn, Bach, and AAG. So that is Councillor Flynn. You can go ahead with opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Thank you to the administration for being here. Thank you to my city council colleagues. Thank you to the housing advocates as well for the tremendous work they've done for so many years. Again, I want to say thank you to Lydia Edwards for her work on this important issue. It's a critical conversation on how we can continue to protect tenants in the city, especially now that this pandemic has caused many people to lose their jobs and income, and also at risk of losing their housing as well, especially our seniors, low-income families, communities of color, persons with disabilities. I'm also glad to see that we're receiving federal grants that can go towards helping those impacted by this pandemic as well. I also believe that language access and outreach to immigrants is critical at this time to ensure that all of our residents are aware of the potential resources available to them. And I want to know that we are doing as much as we can to assist our immigrant neighbors that may not speak English. Again, I want to say thank you to my colleagues, the administration, the housing advocates. I look forward to hearing from everybody and learning more about some of the comments and some of the opinions from other people. Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to thank everybody for being here today, and especially DND for the many expeditious ways that you've gotten the prior iterations of this funding out to people. And I think for all of us, it's just really important for us to be channeling this aid from the federal government, such as it is, even though we know it should be much more, as effectively as possible out to the people who need it right now. And so I really appreciate the work the department's been doing, and looking forward to hearing updates and kind of next steps on that front, especially since this is the first of, not the first hearing with you all, but the first hearing about, how we're using these federal funds in the wake of Massachusetts lifting the eviction moratorium. And so interested to know sort of how we're funneling this into our overall effort to make sure that nobody in the city of Boston loses their housing in this difficult time. So thanks, and thank you, Madam Chair, and to you and Councillor Flynn as sponsors today.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councillor Mejia, and before Councillor Mejia speaks, Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone who's here today for the panel. I unfortunately will be in and out of this session, but looking forward to just learning more about the work that's underway and what needs to still be done. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Mejia, we've started a real quick, just to bring you up very quickly. We are just doing a check-in, honestly, on the funds that we're going to hopefully vote to give to DND to allow for them to continue to do their good work. And then also just checking in on the rent relief program, as well as just tenants and what's happening now post the eviction moratorium. Councillor Mejia?
Yes, thank you. Chairwoman, Councilor Edwards for holding this hearing. The eviction moratorium ended a month ago today, actually, and we're already seeing an increase in evictions, particularly in neighborhoods like Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. People are looking to us to act, and we need to act quickly. I look forward to getting some answers regarding this grant that is up for discussion today, and I'm especially interested to hear and see how the city has moved on housing justice since we last met on these dockets. So thank you so much for hosting. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to the administration. And why don't we just take it in order of the dockets? Let's talk the funding first, what it's doing, how is it different from other funding, and then we'll go into we'll move into someone to talk about specifically the rent relief, post eviction stuff that's going on. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairperson Edwards. That's exactly the way in which I think we organized our talking points for you today. So thank you. Also want to thank Councilors Flynn, Bach, Asabi, George, and Mejia for being here with us today. For the record, I am Tim Davis, Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research at the Department of Neighborhood Development. Thank you for having us here today to provide an update on the Rental Relief Fund, as well as to discuss the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG funding, made available to the City of Boston from the Federal CARES Act. I will begin with a summary of the federal funding, then turn over to Taylor Kane to discuss the Rental Relief Fund in more detail. The March 27th Federal CARES Act allocated $10,257,948 to Boston in CDBG funding on April 1st, 2020. All CARES Act funds are to be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus pandemic. CDBG funds can be used for a range of eligible activities that prioritize the needs of low and moderate income persons, serving households with incomes under 80% of the Boston metropolitan area median income, or in a geographic area where at least 51% of the households have incomes under that threshold. In April, we proceeded with an accept and expend vote with the council, with the goal of spending half of these funds on residential rental relief and the remainder on small business relief. Given that these funds are available to us through September 2022, and other sources of funds such as coronavirus relief funds, which is also from the CARES Act but went directly to Treasury Department and then to the city as opposed to HUD, these funds must be used by 2020. So therefore, we have relied primarily on the coronavirus relief funds, or CRF funds, for the rental relief fund and for small business relief to date. As of today, we have committed $8 million to the rental relief fund, including $6 million from the CRF and $2 million of the first round of CDBG funding. We have set aside the remaining $8 million of the original $10 million of CDBG CV funding to address rental relief needs. On September 11th, 2020, which is what triggered the request that we're addressing today, HUD allocated Boston an additional $9,781,393 in CDBG CV funds. While we are setting these funds aside for rental relief, as of yet, we have not requested a vote by the council to accept and expend the funds. We were waiting to see how Boston's needs would evolve, as the CDBG CV funds can be used for a range of other needs, including small business relief, COVID treatment and quarantine facilities, de-densification of shelters, and job training. As we modify these plans, we would be happy to report back to the council on our plans for these funds, and will be required by HUD to post an amendment to our HUD action plan with a public comment period before expending these funds as well. Obviously, we're going to continue by turning this over to Taylor Kane, and then after Taylor and Dominique speak, then obviously if the councilors have questions on any of these matters, that we can come back to them.
Thank you. Taylor and Dominique?
Yes.
We've also been joined by Councilor O'Malley.
Great. So I'm gonna.
Sorry, apologies. Go ahead.
I can go ahead and share my screen. And thank you again to the council for having us back in this space to provide some updates on the rental relief fund, both past rounds and then the current reopening. And just want to make sure folks can, I'm actually sharing my screen. Yeah, great, wonderful. So over the past several months, the Rental Relief Fund has had 2 lotteries. And so wanted to start by sharing what we've seen from the first and second lottery process for the Rental Relief Fund. We had we had 1,932 applications that were returned to our partner agencies from round 1 and round 2. We had 420 households who, in that process of reviewing their applications, were deemed ineligible or who decided to opt out of moving forward in the process. We have distributed assistance to 1,126 households for a total of 4 million, around 4 million funds have been distributed from the first and second lottery. And we have 55 applications that are still in process awaiting final documentation from round 1 and round 2. In terms of where households who received funding from round 1 and round 2 were located across the city, and we have this breakdown that's available on the screen, which really matches what we saw in terms of the initial response from the pre-screening that we used in round 1 and round 2. So we saw a number of households from East Boston apply initially and who received funding. Also Dorchester, Roxbury, and Brighton were other neighborhoods where a significant amount of assistance was directed. We reopened the Rental Relief Fund on Monday, October 19th. And before kind of diving into what we've been seeing from the applications that have come in from the reopening, wanted to just do a brief recap of the changes that we've made over the course of the past few months to prepare for the reopening of the fund. So for the reopening, we've created a one-stop application process where we developed an online application form where tenants can submit all required materials at once, and also utilized a platform that allows tenants and landlords to work together to complete applications so that they can submit all of their required materials at the same time. We've also really deepened our focus on language and technology access when it comes to Rental Relief Fund materials. All of the application materials are available in 10 different languages. We've created how-to guides that are available on the Rental Relief Fund webpage that provides how-to instructions for both tenants and landlords. We've been hosting workshops with community groups to provide them some training on how to help residents that they're working with apply for the fund. And then we continue to utilize the language line and provide application support via phone for households who are experiencing difficulty completing the online form, which is able to be completed both via laptop and via phone. And then just wanted to end by reiterating that we've updated language in our owner contract to include a commitment for property owners, landlords who are receiving funding to participate in landlord-tenant mediation and to commit to notifying the Office of Housing Stability if there are any changes in tenancy. So in terms of what we've seen since the fund reopened on the 19th, we've had 1,255 applications come in, and this is as of this past Friday. 764 of those applications have been deemed ineligible, which I'll dive into the reasons for ineligibility. And we have 486 applications in process, which means we have completed application materials from tenants. And now our partner agencies are in the process of following up with those tenant property owners and landlords. So there are several reasons that residents might be or would be deemed ineligible for this particular resource. So we had 68 non-City of Boston residents apply, residents of the Boston Housing Authority, folks who have mobile vouchers, full-time college and graduate students, past RRF recipients, and then households who have not experienced economic impact due to COVID. There are 3 reasons for ineligibility that have asterisks by them, which indicate areas where we're continuing to do work to really figure out how to support these households. So we're in conversations with the Boston Housing Authority around different ways in which we can potentially identify resources specifically for residents of BHA. We've been reaching out to past recipients from round 1 and round 2 of the Rental Relief Fund who are still experiencing difficulty paying rent and allowing them to hit the max of $4,000 in assistance. So they are continuing to work with the partner agency who initially processed their application. And then we have made a modification to the current application form where we have removed the option for households to select no economic impact due to COVID, and instead have a text box where folks can explain the ways in which they've been economically impacted by COVID. In terms of what we've seen from the households who have been deemed eligible, just offering a similar breakdown around neighborhoods where we're seeing applications come from. So again, this looks very similar to the map of where funding has already been distributed, where East Boston, Dorchester, and Roxbury really rise to the top in terms of neighborhoods where we're seeing applications from. And then we are also keeping track of the racial and ethnic breakdown of applicants to the Rent Relief Fund. And this is in addition to the neighborhood breakdown. This is data that we're reviewing on a regular basis to really ensure that these funds are being distributed equitably across the city. So on the screen is just a breakdown of what we've been seeing in terms of the different types of households applying. We also are asking folks to share what industries that they work in. So because we know that there are certain industries that have been significantly impacted by COVID. So we can see here where we're seeing a lot of applicants who are in education and health services, leisure and hospitality, food services, and accommodations, which really aligns with what we're seeing in terms of industries that have experienced layoffs or reductions in work hours. And then I believe this is the final slide on updates for the fund itself, but we're also tracking how much back rent different applicants have. So of the applications that have been deemed complete, around 347 have arrears less than 4,000. We have about 164 who have arrears greater than 4,000, and then a smaller number that have arrears greater than 6,000. And then we're also tracking household status in terms of vulnerability to eviction. So we have about 24 applications currently that are court involved in some way. We have 288 households who have unpaid rent that they are unable to pay, and then 174 applicants who have been able to make rent but will face future hardship doing so. And from here, I'm going to turn it over to Dominique to talk about the city's post-eviction moratorium plan.
All right, thank you, Taylor. And thank you, Council, for having us here to talk a little bit about our post-eviction moratorium plan. I'm Dominique Williams, Deputy Director for the Office of Housing Stability. And I'll just be running through the last few slides of the presentation to talk about what our office has put into place to help constituents in the face of the pending eviction crisis. Thank you. So this slide really just shows the number of calls that have come into our office. I think I've shared this before at our last council hearing, and we've updated it through the end of the month of October. As I've said before, on April 1st, our city was one of the first to stand up the Rental Relief Fund. We saw an increase in a massive increase in call volume that first week of April, and then again in June, when the second round of rental relief opened up. Finally, closer to the end of the graph here, showing the week of October 26th, and in the middle, the week of October 17th. So that's the time when the moratorium was ending, as well as when on October 19th, when we opened up our third round of rental relief. So call volume has not been quite as high as it was back in April, but is still peaking. Next, just to talk a little bit about a summary of our post-eviction moratorium plan. We've beefed up our communications, we've stepped up legal assistance and financial assistance. In terms of communications, we've sent out a mailer that includes more than 46,000 households in high-risk eviction areas. Before the moratorium lifts, it was sent out just to explain tenants' rights. I'll show a graphic of that as well in the coming slides. We redesigned our OHS website to make sure that it's more user-friendly for eviction defense. We wanted to make sure that since a lot of folks were calling into the office, that they had access to the same exact information online as well. And then we translated and promoted the CDC declaration form so tenants can invoke that CDC moratorium when they're being called into court on summary process cases.
We've also been hosting community meetings, and we're still trying to become a part of the City Hall to Go truck. I think that's still in progress. In terms of legal assistance, we were able to pass, with the approval of the council and the full support of the mayor, the Housing Stability Notification Act. We also have put in place a landlord pledge. We've added 2 attorneys at GBLS for eviction defense. The council approved a few months ago, just in the course of the budget, an additional housing court navigator. So we have that position that's also available. And we're also now hosting weekly virtual clinics. So far, they're mostly on just housing needs that people have. And we're planning to start up legal clinics for eviction defense closer to the end of the month. And then finally, as Taylor said, we reopened the rental relief fund on October 19th. Thanks. This is just an example of the tenant rights mailer. We've translated this into 7 different languages. The tenants rights mailer went out to 46,000 households, and just up at the very top, you can see it. We wanted to make sure that tenants know that only a judge can evict them. We wanted to make sure that tenants receive this information before the end of the eviction moratorium. The mailer was actually sent out to households in Chinatown, in parts of Dorchester, East Boston, Mattapan, Mission Hill, Roxbury, and the South End. And we used BPD overtime funds to help to pay for that mailer. Next slide, please. This is the back of the eviction, the tenant rights mailer. We did translate it into 7 different languages, and then also made sure that the QR codes were connected to each language. So that way, when tenants did receive this, they could click on sign up for the QR code and be bumped right over to our website to get additional information about eviction defense. We found this to be very helpful, and we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on it. Next slide. Next, we have the Housing Stability Notification Act. It was proposed by Mayor Walsh on October 5th and finally passed unanimously by the City Council on the 21st of October. As you all well know, the purpose of the Notification Act was really just to ensure that tenants have information about their rights and the different financial and legal resources that they may be able to use if they're being pulled into court for a summary process case. The Notification Act also requires landlords and foreclosing owners to provide information to our office, so that way we are able to help to track the evictions that are, or the potential evictions that are coming in the city of Boston as well. We've created a notification document that's available in 11 languages, and landlords are required to provide that to tenants at the same time as they give their notices to quit. Next slide. Okay, so if landlords don't provide that notification to the tenant, then tenants are asked to report that violation to the Office of Fair Housing and Equity. The Fair Housing and Equity Office does an investigation, and then pending a determination can send that same notification over to the Inspectional Services Department for either issuing of a fine or issuing of a warning. The fine could go up to $300 per day. Ultimately, we did put this information on our website as well, boston.gov/landlord notification or boston.gov/tenant notification. One thing that we have been calling attention to is just the fact that this violation does not stop an eviction in courts. Okay, this is an example of the Notification Act, the resource guide that's provided, gives information up top about our office, our phone number, as well as our website. The middle section here just gives information about financial assistance for any rental arrears that may be due, provides information about our city rental relief fund, as well as RAFT funding from the state. And then finally, that third box over there just gives information about legal assistance that tenants may be able to avail themselves of. The rest of the slide here just runs through, just making sure that tenants know that only a court can evict them, provides information about what a notice to quit is, and the process for a court complaint. At the very bottom there, it also provides a QR code to get that notification in additional languages. Next slide, please. So the landlord pledge, we've been saying that one of the only ways that we'll come out of this housing crisis and health crisis intact is by making sure that landlords and tenants are both aware of their responsibilities and their rights. But we also want to make sure that landlords are playing fair with tenants. So we've put together this landlord pledge, which just asks landlords to abide by the CDC moratorium, to engage with tenants to create a payment plan, and to accept rental assistance from RAFT or from our city's rental relief fund, and to ensure that tenants who have a Section 8 or MRVP are doing the appropriate rental adjustments. So far, we've had 44 landlords, some major CDCs, as well as affordable housing developers in the city sign up to the landlord pledge. And it's been gaining a lot of traction over the past few weeks. Next slide, please. Finally, in terms of legal assistance, OHS has added two attorney positions over at Greater Boston Legal Services for eviction defense using those same BPD overtime funds. So we've really put those to solid use. We predict that those will help to prevent an additional 215 evictions each year. And as I stated before, we've also were able to expand the Housing Court Navigator program. So we now we have one position that's available through Metro. I think they're currently interviewing, and the first Housing Court Navigator is still available through Zoom Counter at the Eastern District Housing Court for tenants who may need to find legal or financial resources to assist. And then finally, we're still in the process of hosting our weekly eviction defense clinics, but we've been testing out the process with just assisting tenants on a weekly basis through a virtual walk-in center. So I think that's it for me. I'm not sure who I'm supposed to hand it over to now, but thank you again for letting us to present, and I'm here to answer questions.
Yeah, that does the end of our presentation. Rick and Katie off from our office are also here for questions. So we do turn it over to the counselors. Thank you.
Thank you. And so to my colleagues, I'm going to put us on a timer to get through questions. I'm going to start the first round on a 3-minute kind of timer, and then we'll go back if we need to do a second round. So starting in order of arrival, Councillor Flynn, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Council Edwards. And I enjoyed listening to the presentations from the administration. Want to say thank you for your work. Impressed with the outreach on language access. As it relates to language access, can you talk a little about some of the outreach we're doing to the immigrant community in Boston, and how that communication is going, but also how are the results? Anyone can take the question.
Yeah, happy to get us started. And then Dominique, I'm sure, can speak to the many ways in which we're doing outreach with our immigrant communities through HS. But we've been working really closely with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement. And so some of the community workshops that I referenced have been in coordination with them, and really kind of helping community groups that are well connected in our immigrant communities to help them understand how to help residents apply for the fund has been one way in which we've tried to be really thoughtful in making sure that we're getting the word out there, but also getting the kind of tools and instructions out there for even how to access the rent relief fund in particular.
Yes, thanks, Taylor, for starting us off. Just this past Friday, we had an update session with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement and our Ethnic Press Roundtable. So we've been getting the word out that way, in addition to just making sure that the resources that we have are translated into multiple different languages and available on our website. I think I did mention our tenant rights mailer that went out was translated into 7 different languages. Our CDC declaration, moratorium declaration, is available on our website in 11 different languages. So we've been getting the word out, but also we've really been making sure that when folks are calling in, they're directed to our website and are able to access the resources available, translated and available in their languages.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, this is my last question. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Dominique. For immigrant communities, and I represent a large immigrant community, besides language access, are there any other obstacles that might be in the way in terms of being evicted? Are there any legal issues as it relates to whether someone is documented or undocumented? Is that a concern? Or is that a challenge?
So I guess the only thing that I can think that may pose a challenge is in terms of access to the internet, just depending on like the communities that folks are coming from. There may not be equitable access to the internet in general, which also could prevent people from having an opportunity to access the courts since the courts are now virtual. We haven't had too many complaints. I haven't had a single complaint actually that I can think of that where tenants are saying that they don't have access to the appropriate language in court. And we've been assured by the Eastern District that their Housing Court Specialist Department has also increased language access for tenants who are facing eviction through their courts.
But a tenant wouldn't have any less rights because they're undocumented, would they?
No.
No.
Okay. No, I'm glad to hear that because as I said, I have a large immigrant community. Many are undocumented, but I want to make sure that my constituents, whether they're documented or undocumented, have the same rights as everybody else. So I'm glad to hear that. I want to say thank you to Dominique, thank you to Taylor, and thank you to Tim. And I see Katie down in the bottom there too. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, Councilor Bach, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the D&D team. That was a really informative, helpful presentation. And so just a few quick follow-up questions is just on the, and just to be clear, I think you had one slide, sorry, I've forgotten if it was Taylor or Dominique, but where you had the 486 applications in process and then you had 1255 folks that had applied. Is the 486 a subset of the 1255? It is.
Yes, it is.
That's what I thought. Okay. And I was wondering if you could, I remember way back in the spring when we talked about the first round, there was a real problem with, people who filled out that initial interest form. And then you guys were trying to chase them down for further documentation and to actually get them into the channels with the providers. And I remember at the time us talking about what was going on there and everything. And I just wonder, has that been solved as a lag problem? Did you ever figure out what was going on there? I mean, sort of what's the state of affairs on that front?
Yeah, it's a great question and really informed why we made the decision to go with this kind of one-stop process so that we're kind of getting all of the information that we need at one time from the tenants and then having the follow-up that the partner agencies are doing with the landlords and property owners for the required documentation that we need from them. So I think that what we're seeing with the new application process is that it is allowing folks to kind of do everything at once, which is something that I think that we learned from the first round, that when you had to have kind of this constant back and forth, the likelihood that folks would kind of drop off or get lost in that process increased. So that's something that we're continuing to pay attention to, is ensuring that kind of this one-stop shop is a way to prevent that process of kind of an increased lag time or constant back and forth to get the materials that we need.
That's great. That's awesome to hear. And I wondered if you could just speak a little bit to, you talked about having success with the mailer that you sent out with the different languages. And obviously you guys have also translated the CDC declaration. I just wonder if we have any data on the back end of sort of like number of people using the QR code or downloads just CDC form, just whether there's a sense on our side of which of the materials that we've made available are being actively utilized by people. And I guess the same thing goes for the just degree of utilization of the court navigators or the GBLS caseload, just sort of wondering about those resources that we've put out into the space.
I don't have numbers on the QR code or the declaration form, but we can certainly get those to you. And that might tell an interesting part of the story too. I do anticipate that access to both will increase over the coming weeks now that the courts are opening up and we're starting to get our first reports of people who are having the first mediation session. So we can get that information to you.
Okay,
I
yeah,
can
no,
tell you, Counselor, sorry, I can tell you that since we've improved our website to be more conducive to eviction defense, and I can tell you that the eviction FAQ page, which is that QR code, we've had a huge increase in volume to that page. Just last week, we had over 2,000 page views, which is up from, obviously 0 from last month when that page didn't exist. Right after the eviction or the rental relief pages had over 26,000 page views from October 12th to November 12th. So we do have analytics on those web pages, and we can get you the further detail on each breakdown.
yeah, and I guess
3 minutes. So if you want to wrap this up.
yeah, I was just going to say my interest in it is less, for you all to provide me with it, and more that I think right now the eviction crisis, we're all looking for early warning signs and ways of knowing what's going on. And it seems like accessing your resources to the extent you have that data might help you know what's going on. So I just wanted to flag that. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mejia, 3 minutes.
Hello. Hi. Yes. Okay. So I'll be quick. My questions are for Tim and Taylor. I'm just curious. You mentioned, Tim, initially that you planned on spending this rental relief, but wanted to wait to see how things changed. What prompted those changes? I'm just curious. And will you be determining how to spend grant money as a result of the community feedback you received? And how do you plan to utilize community process that HUD requires? And then for Taylor, I'm just curious if you can talk about why applications opted for the rental relief after applying, opted out after applying for the first place, and how many workshops have you held so far? What groups have you worked with? And the past rental relief recipients who are no longer eligible, are they reapplying because their relief money ran out? I know that's a lot of questions and I only have 3 minutes, but do what you can and I'll be happy with whatever I get. And I know that I got my wing woman always make sure that people understand my translation and what I'm trying.
Okay, I think it's first and most important to kind of clarify or maybe reframe it that we have really kind of thought that even though we were originally going to use half of that first 10 million for small business relief and half for rental relief, small business relief is now being funded through other means. And so we really are holding, we committed $8 million and we are holding almost 18 million additional dollars that we have set aside for rental relief. Now, the reason why we haven't done a full commitment on that is just because, I mean, if we had, applications for that kind of money, then we would obviously be moving towards releasing those funds. But while we are, and because we're not doing a lottery anymore, it's a first come, first serve. So we're not trying to limit who comes into the program at this point. In that specific way, we are mostly just being mindful that we would prefer to use it for rental relief, but know that there could be some other emergency needs related to COVID that it could still be used for. The HUD process is that we would post an amendment to our HUD plan for 5 days. It has to be published. We also send out emails to a list of organizations and advocates, and any input we would acknowledge and look at in terms of whether or not we would proceed. However, we're fairly certain that rental relief is the primary thing that people are wanting in the community. And it's just if there's some kind of emerging immediate need that we don't have any other way to address, then we would have to think about other uses of those funds. Taylor?
Yeah, so I'll try to go quickly through the reasons for opting out, community groups that we've reached out to, and then what we're seeing in terms of past recipients. So reasons for opting out, really, there's variation. So there are a couple of different reasons. There are situations where folks have moved, where there are situations where folks decided that they didn't want to kind of to ask their landlord for certain types of documentation. There are kind of a range of reasons that led to folks opting out, but it's a relatively small number that we saw opt out versus those that were deemed ineligible. So can provide that breakdown later if it's of interest. In terms of the community groups that we have done workshops for, so we've been working closely with different city departments and partners. So we've done presentations for organizations who have received funding through the Boston Resiliency Fund. We've done presentations to community organizations through the Disability Commission, through Age Strong, and through the Office of Food Access and the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement. They all have kind of monthly convenings with large groups of organizations that we've done presentations to. And then for past recipients, I forget the specifics of that question, but I think it was around if they're able to come back for additional assistance.
Yeah, no, for the past rental relief recipients who are no longer eligible, are they reapplying because their relief money ran out? That's basically.
Yeah, so they're reapplying because there's still continued need in terms of they've continued to face difficulty paying rent. So we're having them go back to the partner agency that processed their initial application for households that have not yet received the max benefit of $4,000 in assistance.
Counselor.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna be dipping back in. My internet is really bad, but I'm gonna be dipping back in. I'm gonna thank you so much. I appreciate the answers, and I think my time has expired. So I'll be back if I need to be.
Thank you. I actually will be having to step out for a doctor's appointment, so I will be out for about 11 o'clock, and Vice Chair Councillor Bach will be taking over at that time. Before I go, I do want to jump in the line. I know Councillor Anissa Sabi-George has a question, and then Councillor Bach has the remaining order, but I'm going to take the prerogative of being the chair right now and jump the line. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for the incredible effort. And I have to say, you know, to the Office of Housing Stability, DND, you've had to both build a bike and ride it at the same time, and do it with an intense amount of scrutiny and lights on you in the middle of a pandemic, none of which I envy. But I do want to acknowledge that kind of pressure, and you're rising to the occasion and learning and re-rising to the occasion and learning and re-rising to the occasion. So thank you for that effort. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on what I'm going to be telling my constituents and where we're going, just confirming numbers, things like that. We have 1,100 folks, 1,126 who have received the funds. And I'll look to you, Taylor, who did the presentation. You can just do thumbs up if I'm correct in my numbers, right? So 1,126 received the funds, so about 4 million funds have been distributed so far. Okay, great. And so what we have of the original 8 million, about half left, 4 million, is that what we're saying? With about 468 in progress to access some of that 4 million. Okay. And so when you say there's an additional $18 million of potential relief that is not necessarily, you can do thumbs up, all going to go to rent relief, but it is a potential kitty of funds that we will be looking to assist, right? And we have that until 2022. Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Wonderful. Okay, so we can still adjust, have communication about this, have suggestions for it, and working on ways in which to get this to folks. Mm-hmm. Because correct. I do think at some point we should, not right now, but I do think at some point, especially the further we get away from this pandemic, but the input, you know, the lasting effects of the pandemic will be probably well into 2022. We might want to consider how we are engaging, or if we still need to engage with the landlords at the same level of commitment, and whether there's a way to just streamline funds directly to tenants and helping them. But that's for a later conversation. I think we are focused, and rightly so, in the eviction crisis that we could be in right now, and that involves landlords being at the table. So thank you so much for that. I'm excited about having another conversation once we get hopefully a vaccine out there, and hopefully we're working in a different way. With regard to Dominique, you mentioned, which is great, the 2 new attorneys from GBLS. Are these full-time attorneys dedicated to cases that OHS refers, or are these just attorneys for everybody else?
No, these are two full-time attorneys stationed at GBLS and through our contract with Homestart.
So they will be, I mean, they'll be predominantly or only helping Boston residents?
Yes, that's right.
Excellent, excellent. And how long will we have them?
Hopefully into perpetuity. I mean, it's that's a funding question. I think that goes well beyond my pay grade, but hopefully for a longer period of time than just, you know, a year or two.
But hopefully, I mean, definitely it sounds like with the $18 million possibly being into 2022, that could be a source of funding. Am I correct, Tim, Dominique?
I think so. So that's
Yeah,
funding
I
that
think
came
so.
from the BPD overtime budget. I think it's just dependent upon whether we get that funding going forward.
Yeah,
But
it's my understanding that we'll have that every year.
Well, we don't know that, right? Because we have to
Right,
pass
right.
the budget next year. But the
We're
money that
hopeful.
we do, there's no commitment from us on that. I'll say that. But I will say too, and I see we've been joined by Counselor Janey and Counselor Flaherty, but I will say, and what I'm trying to get is, regardless of the politics of the business of politics in the city of Boston, that $18 million, could that be a source?
Yes, I believe so. Sorry, this is Rick. It should be. I think we have to make sure it complies with the CDBG income requirements and all the other CDBG rules, but I don't see why it wouldn't be.
I only ask because politics is one thing, and then this is something that should be purely, we as council should know what's on the table if we're going to enter a political discussion. That's all. We should be fully informed. And so I'm very excited about all of these infrastructures that you have built and who you've invited to the table and your leadership. So not congratulations, but thank you for that. Dom, Anik, Taylor, Katie, Tim, Rick, thank you for that. And so I will, I'll follow up with you specifically on East Boston, because I see that we're leading in one too many things, COVID cases, rent relief requests, and then also with the Suffolk Downs and how we marry the two together in a way that helps bolster that. But I wanted to say thank you. And I think any other specific questions are so granular and neighborhood specific for me, I'll just follow up with emails. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm now going to go ahead and turn it over to Vice Chairwoman, Councillor Bach, and I will see you hopefully in the next 30, 40 minutes. Goodbye.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards. All right, next, if whoever's staffing could make me a co-host and also admit President Janey, Councillor Braden, and Councillor Flaherty from the attendees spot, that would be great. I'm going to go next to Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you everyone for being here. I wasn't going to ask questions because I was in and out, but while semi-listening, I don't think we spoke at all about watching any indicators or doing any sort of assessing of risk around families who may become homeless or we're interacting with that then end up in the EA system. So I'm just curious if we're watching for that, if we're taking any accounting of that and collecting any information.
So can save for the rental relief fund, we are keeping track of households who say that they have individuals under 18 in their households. So we know from the applications that we've seen thus far that about half of the households who have applied have children in their homes.
Are we tracking those specifically any families that for whatever reason then enter the EA system at the state? I want to know that we're preventing families from becoming homeless. And if we aren't for whatever reason, are we tracking that and then building relationships with the shelter providers through this to hopefully rehouse families?
I can say, this is Rick, I can say, I'm not sure if this is, if we're kind of integrating this into the rent relief fund, but I can say separately, we were before you a few weeks ago talking about our emergency solutions grant RFP that we had put out, also using CARES Act funding. And under that RFP, we had dedicated $14 million to rapid rehousing programs, specifically to keep people either on the streets or showing up at the shelters or in shelter. And getting those individuals housed. And we did get responses back to that RFP. We're in the process of evaluating and drafting contracts with the providers for those funds. So again, I'm not the best person to speak to whether that, if there's kind of how that relates to the rent relief, but I do know that we're doing both things, in parallel right now, and engaged with the providers, the Public Health Commission, Pine Street, St. Francis House, other providers, shelter providers, to operationalize those rapid rehousing funds.
Yeah, that's great. But I do, those programs there do fantastic work, especially around individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And I'm confident because I know that DND is working very closely with many of our family shelter providers. I'm just through the rental relief piece, I want to make sure that we're paying particular attention to make sure families don't become homeless, or if there are families that are doubled up and have been doubled up maybe for a period of time since the onset of COVID for a multitude of reasons, aren't now, as we're hitting month 9 and going into, soon into month 10, the families are certainly receiving more pressure and perhaps being pushed out of current living situations, that we're just able to manage those numbers. And I know that work's underway, and there's a lot of support for families and the organizations that work in particular with families who are experiencing homelessness. I think that it's a data or an accountability piece that we just need to be certain to be mindful of through this work. We don't want to add to the crisis. We want to.
Great point, Councillor. I think we need to bring our supportive housing homelessness team together with our housing stability and rent relief fund team and make sure that we're doing all we can for those families.
Great. And I do know that a lot is happening in that space, and just want to sort of amplify it, bring it to the forefront. That's it for me, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sabi George. Next up will be Councillor O'Malley, and then just for councillors to know, the order is Braden, Council President Janey, and then Councillor Flaherty. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you. Sorry, Madam Chair, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this very important work and timely work. I just want to sort of begin. I know you've touched upon this, but can you sort of walk me through a little bit about some of the state's action as it relates to eviction prevention, and how that may be in conflict or support some of the efforts that we're doing here in Boston?
Sure. That's a very broad question. I can kind of give what I have off the top. The state's response, just their eviction prevention plan really just went into effect within the past 3 weeks. So some parts of it were still a bit in flux. One of the things that they've done has been to increase access to RAFT. There was a bit of a slowdown in terms of processing applications over the past few months, but they just, at least the administrator here in Boston has increased staffing. About 2 weeks, last Monday, they had 15 new employees start and are hopefully going to be processing those applications a lot faster than they have in the past. They've also increased the amount of assistance that households can receive from $4,000 up to $10,000. As of, I think 2 weeks ago, they were a little bit fuzzy in terms of how to get that additional funding if a household's already received that $4,000 to then come back and get that increase up to that additional $6,000. And then I can also say that for RAFT funding, they've also increased access for landlords to apply for rental relief funds directly, as opposed to having to wait for a tenant to receive request assistance. Katie, you're really good with the details. Is there anything that I'm forgetting here on that part?
Sure. So, the state has, done a lot, and they've thrown a lot of money into RAFT, which is great. But what we're doing is we're trying to help our constituents combine RAFT funds with our rental relief funds. So we're having our counselors that work at our nonprofits who are distributing funds for rental relief look at what is owed, Councillor O'Malley, to see if the tenancy is sustainable, and then move into the next phase of maybe helping folks with housing surge and paying off rental arrears and working on how we can, help those tenants stay in Boston. The $10,000 RAFT thing is interesting. If a tenant wants anything over a dollar over $4,000 for rental assistance from the state, they actually have to get their landlord to agree to let them stay for 6 additional months. So there's a lot of things that tie them to that. So it's really difficult, I think, for a landlord to agree to that $10,000 figure in order to accept it, which can punish the tenant. So we're not working as closely with the state as we would like. And hopefully we can, strengthen that partnership.
No, that's good. Thank you. Thank you, Dominique and Katie. That sort of got to the purpose of the question about sort of partnerships and communication. So just, you had mentioned two things that I want to follow up on, and I'll close it up for this round. So Dominique, you had said that, if I have it right, there's some of that increased funding and that increased available RAF funding, a landlord can apply for it before his or her tenants apply for it. And then how would that work? All right,
Yes.
and then would the tenants be notified that they wouldn't have to pay the rent?
I'm not particularly familiar with all of the details of how that process is going to work. I thought that I find it to be a little bit odd, but I know that was a request from not Boston, but a number of other municipalities, was just how can they make that so that landlords are not waiting for rent to be paid, but for landlords to just try to access it directly. I wish I had a better answer for you on that.
Yeah, no, and it's clearly it's not on our end, it's on the state's end, but that seems, I'm sure there was good intent behind that policy, but it seems rather unworkable and rife, quite frankly, for abusing the system somehow, that a landlord could access this funds meant to offset, the needed housing support, and then a tenant would necessarily know about it, or that would not necessarily be reflected in sort of his or her monthly cost. And then Katie, you had said that, so if $4,000 was sort of the ceiling, and it's now been extended to $10,000. And then will that sort of has there been any talk of, will that reset in the new year, or is that just?
So for RAFT, it's by the calendar year. So if you received it in November of this year, you can't receive additional funding until November of next year.
Oh, so it doesn't reset January 1. It's 12 months from when it was. Oh, that's interesting.
Sorry. Yeah, it's 12-month period, not calendar year. So not 2021. It'll reset in November of 2021 if you receive the funding this month.
And then
also just to follow up with you on our rental relief fund, you can apply on behalf of your tenant if you're a landlord, but the tenant has to approve all the information and certify the income and things like that. Because we do get a lot of small landlords that are working really hard with their tenants so they can pay, and they don't have access to the technology. So the landlords will come on and upload the documents and things like that to help them out, which is really
no question. And that's a very valid point, that the way the city does, there are small property owners, whom this has been devastating, but the fact that it is mandated in the city's approach to have that sort of shared communication and awareness with the tenant, I think it gives me more peace of mind than perhaps what the state proposal is at this point. And then the last question on this, you had said that, so it's $4,000 is the ceiling. That's being extended to $10,000, and for $1 over every $4,000 sort of approval, you need the landlord to agree to keep you in for 6 months. So I know this is sort of new. This has just been changed, increased to 10,000. But do we have any data on the number of landlords that have signed off on that? In other words, is that stipulation making it unworkable for this needed extended amount of money?
We do not have the data on that, but there was, over a couple thousand pending RAFT applications for our region, for people just looking for the 4,000 in assistance. People were hopeful who had maxed out at 4,000, they could come back for that additional 6. But knowing that there's those restrictions applied to anything over 4,000 has really, I think, been heartbreaking for a lot of the tenants, because the landlords some of them just can't afford to comply with it.
Sure. No, appreciate that. Thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Braden needed to step away for a moment. So we'll go now to Councillor Janey, and then it'll be Councillor Flaherty. Council President Janey.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Thank you. I only have a couple of minutes, and I won't go into many questions. I hear a lot of my colleagues have asked really good questions, but just wanted to offer my deep appreciation and gratitude. I know that this is impacting all of us. Certainly we hear it in my district. So just wanted to extend my deep gratitude to this team. I apologize, I don't have a lot of time. I'm leaving out the door literally for a safety walk in my district, but wanted to offer that, and I will watch the rest of the tape when I can. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thank you to the team. Thank you, you all.
Great. Thank you, Council President. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam President. Sorry, Madam Chair. Quick question. I I guess is, do we know what is the average amount of arrears tenants that are applying for raft assistance from the city are in? And also, what is the breakdown of the number of tenants applying for raft versus landlords applying for funding?
So can speak to what the breakdown for those things are for the city's rental relief fund. For RAFT, the state program, I don't think we have those numbers. But what we're seeing in terms of new applications, we have, of the over 400 complete applications, around 300 have arrears less than 4,000. And then we have around 160 who have rent owed that exceeds 4,000, is what we're seeing in terms of the city's applications. And then in terms of the breakdown of tenants applying themselves versus situations where we have a tenant and landlord working together to complete an application. I don't have that breakdown on hand, but we have a part of the application where folks say who is completing this form. So if that's of interest, we can certainly pass along that breakdown.
That'd be great. And then also to date, how many major property owners have pledged not to evict tenants during this time? I believe the mayor was able to secure right out of the gate. I thought it was somewhere in the vicinity, maybe 30 or 35 major property owners. If that's accurate, has that number grown over the last several weeks?
Yes, it has. It's gone up to 42 at last check, which was this past Friday. So it definitely has grown. And that list, completed list, can be found on our website at the Office of Housing Stability website.
Very good. And so that's obviously an active and hopefully growing list as we continue to work our way through COVID. So I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. So I would be remiss if I didn't make that comment that we're obviously all in this together, trying times across the board in every sector. So I appreciate your attention to detail and look forward to working with my colleagues and the chair to continue to help folks as much as we can moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Braden, just wanted to check if you're back. Okay. I think now we will be going to a second round of questions. And the first up is Councillor Flynn. If my other colleagues could raise your blue hands or otherwise let me know whether you have second round questions. That would be great. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Council Balk. Council Balk, I don't have any questions. Just as I was just wondering, are there housing activists that are testifying after this, or do we know?
I don't believe we have anyone signed up for public testimony today.
Okay. Well, my question would have been, I'm just wondering how the housing advocates are doing during this time. Wondering if Katie or Dominique or Taylor might know about some of the issues that they might have that they're dealing with that city government could be helpful with. Wonder if you guys might have a comment on that, or Tim as well.
I don't have any, we haven't heard anything specific from them, especially in terms of using the CDBG funds, at least recently. I think that Katie and Dominique can speak more about what they've heard, kind of the work that they've been doing with housing advocates around the eviction interventions. Because I know that there's been a lot of chatter back and forth with activists about how to proceed with that. I'm correct in that, correct?
Yeah, I guess I would say that from, the activist advocate community, we've been hearing that there's a lot of tenants who are receiving notices to quit, and sometimes entire buildings of tenants who are receiving notices to quit. They've been sending over information about, we've been sending in response information about how to access rental relief funds and to access legal resources. So it's been a very busy time, I think, for all of us.
No, thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Tim. And I guess my final question is, I have a lot of constituents that work in restaurants, many in the Chinatown community. Obviously, a lot of the restaurants are not opened or limited hours. So they don't have the income coming in. I'm just worrying and asking, what are some of the options? And as we know, people in many of the restaurants, they rely on tips also. So what can we do as a city government to help people that work in restaurants that are really struggling at this time to pay their rent?
Sure. So we work, and Taylor broke down the folks that we're helping out that were previously employed by the service industry or currently employed in the service industry. And we recommend folks apply for every assistance available, from our rental relief fund to RAF from the state. In addition to that funding, we also have flex funds through the Office of Housing Stability, up to $2,500 per household. So we are trying to connect people with every single resource available to them. And then again, we're really hoping with this new federal administration that more additional funding will be coming through. So we work with them on everything. And then what I kind of gleaned on earlier is that we have to help folks with housing search and other issues that they might be having with their landlord. If they're not able, after receiving those resources, to stay in their home, how can we help them stay stably housed within the city of Boston and make sure that they continue to be a part of our community until the vaccine is distributed and everyone can be back eating inside of restaurants and enjoying food in Chinatown. I know we all want to do that very soon. So I would recommend that they call our office and get connected with those resources, because we have a lot of options for folks.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you to the D&D team. No further questions, Councilor Bach.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. It now comes to me in the order. And I was wondering if, and Tim, I'm loath to do this because I know you set it up top, but just if I didn't have my notebook out yet at the time. And I just wondered if we could run one more time through the grants and their relative expirations and like kind of where we are with them. So for instance, that 4,000 that we've expended from the rental relief, that all came from one of the grants that expires in 2020. Is that right?
Vic, do you want to cover this?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilor, so the 4 million, the first 6 million of the 8 that we've committed already to the rent relief fund all came from the CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund money through the U.S. Treasury Department. So that's, D&D is not administering that fund, the Office of Budget Management is, but we were allocated a portion of it. So 6 million came from that, and those funds, as of right now, I think we continue to be hopeful that it'll get extended, but it's not looking good in Congress. That would expire at 12/30/20, so the end of this year, and it actually is 12/30, not 12/31 for some reason. So that expires at the end of this calendar year, and then we would move over to using the 2 million of CDBG from the first 10 million that we got. We have 2 million that's been committed and 8 million set aside.
And those are funds that can be spent up till September of 2022.
Right.
Right. And right. So it's 10 million total, 2 million that's in. But okay, so first question is, so we've spent 4 of the 6 that expire on the 30th of December. Are we on track, do you think, with this next round of applications to spend the remaining 2 before the 30th?
Yeah, I see Charlotte Taylor's nodding her head. Yeah, I think we are. And just to be clear, we can, as long as the costs were incurred, so as long as we're helping people pay rent that was incurred prior to 12/30/20, we can continue to award out the funds and make payments out to landlords on behalf of tenants into 2021, as long as we're covering costs that were incurred before December of this year, or by December of this year. So I think we're in good shape there. And please, Taylor, hopefully Taylor, Dominique, Katie will let me know if we're not. And then we would move on to the CDBG. And then the funds that were here before you today, the 9.7, it's the same timeline. We have until September of 2022 to spend those. we are holding on to them. We expect, now that the eviction moratorium has ended, we expect to see a big uptick in eviction violence. So we want to make sure that we have those funds available if we need them. We're not committing them to anything else. We're holding them in our back pocket to help renters.
Okay, but just to be clear for the council, right? Because obviously there's a request for a accept and
Yep.
expend. The situation right now is we've got 6 million for rental relief that we got to spend by the end of the year. We're on track to spend that. We've
Yep.
got another 2 million that we tagged for rental relief out of this that we have till 2022, but that's already been tagged for rental relief.
Yep.
Then between the grant that we already authorized and this one, there's 17.7 million.
That's right.
That's correct.
Which D&D is basically saying, we haven't formally tagged this all for the rental relief fund. In theory, if something else came up, we are reserving the flexibility to spend it differently. However, we've also not committed it to anything else. And we suspect that demand for rental relief is going to grow such that we probably use the lion's share of this for rental relief.
Exactly.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I guess, and I think you alluded to this, Tim, but I think it's safe for me to request on behalf of the committee and the chair, Councillor Edwards, that, if things were to change significantly such that you were putting a substantial amount of this money towards a different purpose, that the department would come back before the council, even though formally, if we would have already accepted and expended.
Correct. I think what we would do is that we would formally submit a memo to you, and then you could decide whether you want a public hearing on it or not.
Right. Okay. But just to be, I want to put it on the record that I think the council would expect a communication on that front if you were using it differently. It has been, a challenge for us. Obviously, for instance, back in, I think, April, we authorized the original $100 million of the CARES Act, which is what that portion of that 6 is from. And it's been super important in this crisis to get that money out, and especially given it's the fact that it expires and disappears if we don't spend it by the 30th of December. But it does give us that's more money than we would normally authorize without a concrete plan for how it's all being spent way ahead of time. So I just want to keep in mind that the council's oversight role, we want to be kept in the loop on these things. Okay, those were my questions. And I think if Councillor Braden isn't back, that I was going to ask you guys a question on her behalf. She had to step out, but she did have a question related to, lots of the folks who live in her district. She was curious about single individuals living in group housing situations who lose income, whether you guys have seen many of those, how that all kind of works, whether the system's set up well to accommodate them. If you could just speak to, and if you had the numbers of how many have applied.
Yeah, so we are keeping track of folks who are in roommate or group situations. And I don't have the number off the top of my head in terms of what we've seen from the reopening, but it's something that we've seen through the duration of the fund, that there are folks who are in roommate situations where only one member of that household is applying, but potentially there is support needed for the full household. So we're working with each of those cases to determine if assistance for that portion of the rent versus the full rent amount, what is needed to ensure the stability of that tenancy.
Okay. But you don't have a concrete number of how many of those people we're dealing with.
Yeah, for the reopening, I could pull that pretty easily, just based on the way the application is laid out, and could get that over to you.
Okay, I think if you could provide that to Councillor Braden via the committee, I think that she would appreciate it. And then I guess a quick follow-up is just in terms of ineligibility, at what juncture we decided that full-time college and graduate students weren't eligible, and just what the sort of department's thinking on that was.
So I believe that's been an eligibility criteria. Maybe we established it in the reopening, but I think we actually instituted it during the second round of the rental relief fund. And can let others speak to kind of the rationale behind the full exemption for full-time college and graduate students. But in terms of the piece around economic impact due to COVID, thinking about folks who are either working or have lost childcare, full-time students didn't quite fit into the populations that we were attempting to serve with this particular resource.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, I mean, I think it also really stems from just our concern that the need is going to be great and we're not going to have enough money at the end of the day. And how do we really target these funds at those who absolutely need it the most? You know, obviously we can change that as we look forward, but we were very worried that, you know, at some point we're going to run out of money. There are going to be people who are really going to be, you know, in bad shape, and we're not going to be able to help them.
Yeah, no, and I'm totally for prioritizing to need right now. I was just thinking about the situations where, you know, I think we have lots of full-time students who, you know, they have if they're undergraduates, they've got a set of loans and support from their family that, you know, is ongoing. And if they're graduate students, maybe they have support from their departments or not, but it isn't hard for me to imagine a situation, especially with some of our like lower income first generation students who are also working and they've got an apartment and they're expected to take care of themselves. Their family's not chipping in, and then they lose that job that's supplementing the full. It's easy for me to imagine a situation in which we would want to have an exception to that policy in terms of people being most greatly impacted. So I just wanted to flag that.
Right, and they can appeal, and we do look at those things on a case-by-case basis. Absolutely, if that's the situation.
Okay, all right, that's good to hear. Yeah, I think those are all of my questions. Councillor O'Malley, did you have any further follow-ups?
I am actually good, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. And thank you all for your tremendously hard work and important work during these difficult days.
Yeah, no, it's we really appreciate you all, and appreciate the clear presentation and just all the data and sharing with us in the council as we tried together to meet what we know is a crisis that's only growing. So I think with that, all my colleagues have had the opportunity to ask their questions, and I don't believe we have any public testimony at this time. So is that right? Sorry, can I just check, Carrie? We don't have any public testimony signups for this.
I haven't received any, so I think we're good to go.
Okay, great, wonderful. So with that, then this meeting of the Committee on Housing and Community Development is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.